Good morning. My name is Dr. Judy Wu Smart. I work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Bee Lab. I am a professor and an entomologist. That means I study insects, and I love to teach and educate people about the importance of insects. There are a number of different kinds of insects. Some are pest insects, some are bad, meaning that they can cause us harm, damage to our food crops, or to our gardens, or even transfer some diseases like mosquitoes do. Some of them are just nuisances that we don't want in our house. So there are a number of insects that we are trying to control and manage, but I enjoy to study the beneficial insects, and that means insects that do something good for us. And so bees and other types of pollinators help us produce food and pollinate the natural flowers in our landscape. Here we're at the UNL Pollinator Garden and Outdoor Classroom, and here are some native bee nests here. These are wild bee nests in which wild bees will come in and they will collect nectar and pollen, deposit an egg, and start to rear brood right inside. So these are utilized by solitary stem nesting bees. There are also many, many different species of solitary ground nesting bees that do a very similar thing where they collect nectar and pollen, go in the ground and lay eggs and start to produce brood. But today we're going to be talking about honeybees. These honeybees, these are social and managed by beekeepers. They can be commercially managed for pollination, meaning that they're brought to farms so that they can provide the pollination services that then produce the fruits and the vegetables and nuts that we enjoy eating. And so these are the agricultural pollinators that we use to help make foods. Well, I'm going to get my safety gear on, and we're going to go take a look at what it means to be a social honeybee and what it means to be in a colony. All right, I've got my bee veil, and you can see here it's a protective veil that goes around my face. Sometimes you see beekeepers that have a whole suit or an entire garment that covers them but protects them from stings. So we can work in those hives comfortably without being too worried about them getting stung. Now, these are stinging insects, meaning that we do have to be careful, but they only sting if they feel threatened or they feel like we have injured them, pinched them, crushed them. When they sting, they die. So stinging is certainly a last resort for these bees. And so you can see that I'm not wearing a whole lot of safety gear here, but I've spent many, many years studying honeybees, and experienced beekeepers are able to recognize signs of when the bees are starting to feel annoyed and threatened, or when they start to show aggression just before they sting. So we're able to use our management skills and move around the bees so that they don't get overly aggressive. And this is a tool called a smoker. This is another safety tool that a beekeeper uses to calm the bees. Here I'm pushing that smoker down in and out, and it's producing smoke. The bees sense that smoke, and we believe that it's a response to a forest fire. Bees will start to pick up all their belongings and leave in preparation for needing to find a new hive. So the only belongings that bees really have is their honey stores. So when beekeepers put smoke in the hive, it distracts the bees, and they just are busy taking in more nectar and honey, and the beekeeper can work them gently and not disturb the hive at all. Now these bees have a lot of sticky materials. They bring in nectar, they bring in pollen, they bring in plant saps, and all of the frames and all of the combs that are in these hives can become very sticky and really hard to move. So another tool that a beekeeper uses is a hive tool. And a hive tool is just a piece of equipment that we use to make sure that we can move the frames and the combs easily. So there's that hive tool to help me manipulate the frames. And so now I'm going to take a look at these hives. Let's take a look at these. I'm in my yard, and here are some research hives. So these colonies are actually used for research and teaching purposes, but we also make a lot of honey. And it is a very windy day, so you can see my smoker just fell. But we're going to continue to work this colony. I'm going to show you some of the really cool things about social honeybees. Honeybees honeybees are imported into the US, have been imported into the US, and these are European honeybees. Their taxonomic name is Apis mellifera, meaning that is their genus and their species. And so there are over 20,000 different species of bees worldwide, probably 4,000 in North America, and honeybees are just one species. In each of these boxes is one colony of bees, and that colony will contain one queen and many, 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 many worker bees. And those worker bees might fill in a colony and have a small colony like this, and might be only 10,000, or in these larger colonies might have anywhere from 30 to 40 or 50,000 individuals, all part of one colony. And so their queen is there's one queen in that colony and tens of thousands of workers and maybe just a few hundred drones. And drone bees are your male bees. These are the ones that do not sting and have a very different function, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is a strap on our hive, and we have to strap these hives because we have a very hungry raccoon that comes and visits the feeders of these colonies and eats the nectar and the sugar syrup. So I'm going to open up these colonies and get ready here. Okay, now we're back, and here we are. I'm ready. I've got my smoker. I've got my hive tool, and I've repositioned the camera so you can see inside the hive while I'm working it. So here I'm taking the lid off, and for those of you who are watching at home, if you're interested in learning how to keep bees, we strongly suggest that you look into taking a class and connecting with a local beekeeper so that you have some sort of mentor for your first few years. It is a very satisfying adventure to keep bees, but it can also be quite frustrating and challenging, especially when you first begin. So now the first thing you want to think about is where you're putting the bees. And we think about these landscapes. These bees need nectar and pollen from the landscape. So you can see all the forage and the flowering trees and dandelions around right now. Bees will collect nectar and bring that back into the hive to convert into honey. And so nectar and honey are their source of energy or their carbohydrates. They will collect pollen as a source of protein. And so they don't get protein from meat, but from floral pollen sources. So they're vegetarians, unlike their relatives, the wasps, which are carnivorous insects that feed on other insects and meat. So here I'm going to go through this colony, and this colony is put in a box called a Langstroth hive. They are contained in a wooden frame, and those wooden frames are actually allows a beekeeper to actually inspect and move and go into the center of the hive without being too disruptive. So in honeybee colonies, because they are social and are able to overwinter in a colony, they don't actually hibernate, but they're in there clustering, and they are thermoregulating. So they're able to produce brood much earlier. So here, these bees are already well into producing brood and far along into spring. This frame allows us to work the bees. That one just has no wax, no comb built in whatsoever. And so you can see it's just wooden, and the plastic insert here really has no comb or no wax deposited on there. So we put those in there, but the bees will draw out comb right on those plastic foundation frames. So here's a frame that has been completely drawn out, and the bees have started to produce brood or lay eggs and deposit food in. So here, you can see this frame is still being drawn out. At the edge, you can see that little black foundation still there, a nice white fresh comb being drawn out. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the different components of the hive. This is wax. And so the bees will consume excess sugar or nectar, and that stimulates their wax glands in their abdomen to produce wax scales. So then they take those wax scales that come out of their abdomens, they'll manipulate it with their mouth parts and then build those hexagon comb shapes. So the bees will do that all on their own naturally, building those beautifully constructed hexagon combs. These frame structures just allows the comb to be a little bit more structurally sound. But here you can see all these bees are workers. They're all females. They're all daughters of the queen. And they all have particular roles in the hive. So, for example, you see all these bees flying in and out of the hive. These are the foragers, and they are foraging for nectar and pollen to bring back to the hive. Then meeting those foragers are what we call house bees, and those house bees will take in the nectar and the pollen and process it into honey and store it into the combs. They'll also build comb and do a lot of the cleanliness in the hives. Then let's see if we can see some of this honey and pollen that is being brought in by the foragers and then stored by the house bees. Now you can see this frame right here has one side that is empty and the other side that is drawn out. And here, that side, right here where those cells are capped, is honey. Inside the cells where there is no capping, there's actually a liquid in there, and that is nectar. So honey is essentially nectar that has been processed, and most of the moisture has been removed, and the bees have incorporated their own salivary and digestive enzymes. So there you go. If I put my fingers right in there, oh my goodness, that is fresh honey right there. And that honeybee immediately starts licking the honey right off my finger. They have very strong sugar receptors that can sense when nectar and honey is nearby. So as we continue, the bees that are bringing back food that is then processed by the house bees is utilized by these younger bees that then consume that pollen and use it to feed the brood or the young. So these nurse bees will take care and feed the brood as they go through their larval stages. They will also take care and tend to the queen. So the queen will lay about 1,000 eggs a day. And so she can choose to lay either a fertilized egg, which then becomes a female worker bee, or an unfertilized egg, which then develops into a drone male bee. So here I have a queen, and she's marked with a blue paint mark just so that it's easier for me to find her, because she's only one individual in a hive with maybe 20 to 50,000 individuals. So painting her just makes it easier for the beekeeper to keep an eye on her. So here, let's see if we can show you this beautiful queen and the mother of the bees. Now the queens are the longest lived bees in the hive. They can live 2 to 4 years, but depending on where those colonies are, they might have to be replaced more frequently. And that is because there's a lot of environmental stressors, poor nutrition or poor landscapes can cause nutritional deficiencies, and it can cause queens to be just not as productive brood and egg layers. And so they might have to be replaced to keep those colonies going. So here she is, she's roaming around the colony, and she's actually looking for empty cells in which she can lay. And so if you're watching her move through this colony, you'll actually see some of these worker bees that start to corral around her, and they start to face her, and they start to surround her. This is the nurse bees or her retinue that groom her, smell her, feed her, and tend to her every need, because all she's doing is laying. Those nurse bees will then take her smells and distribute those smells all throughout the hive. So now that the colony knows that they have a queen and she's laying and she's doing very well and she's healthy. Now there's a lot of brood on this frame, meaning, and a brood is another word for immature bees. You can see inside of what looks like a C-shaped larva or grub, that is the baby bee. And so much like butterflies, bees have an egg, a larva or caterpillar stage, kind of a grub stage, a cocoon or a pupation stage, and then they emerge as adults. So the cells that are capped right here are actually the cocoon stage or the pupating stage of these bees. It's a little small to see the eggs, but the open C-shaped larvae will then become capped over and completely metamorphosized inside, forming, completely shifting their body organs and converting from a little grub form into an adult bee with wings and stripes. So, so here we go. When the queen begins to get older or becomes sick or begins to fail, she can be replaced and her smells are diminished, and so the bees will start to replace her. And so how that is done is really just a dietary trigger. So the workers can choose to rear a new queen by changing the diet at a certain critical development period. So here I am trying to start looking for some more brood and some more interesting things to see. Now here I'm lightly touching these bees, and you can see these bees aren't being threatened. I'm being gentle. They're not being aggressive. I'm just gently touching them to move them away. I'm not bouncing them. I'm not vibrating them. Honeybees can be quite docile if you know how to work them safely. So here I want to show you on this frame, here are some bees that have just finished completely metamorphosizing, changing from the grub form to an adult, and now are chewing their way out of the capping. So they're emerging, newly emerged adults. And you can see there's a couple heads right there peeking out, and they're chewing their way out. That might take a few minutes for them to come out. And you can see nurse bees that are hanging around and that will feed them as they slowly chew their way out. There's a little head right there again, and then two more right there. And it might take a little while for them to eat, to completely work their way out. It's just a lot of fun to see these bees just moving around. Here, this bee had her head sticking in the cell, and she was actually feeding a larva that was down below in the cell. So they will feed these larvae hundreds of times progressively throughout a day until they go into pupation. And it might take a few minutes for that bee to completely come out. So while her head's coming out, and she's almost completely out, but again, while she's coming out, all these bees are workers and they're females. And so we're going to currently look and see if we can find a drone bee. Now these again are the male bees. They don't sting. They have a very different look to them and a very different function. And there she is. It looks like her head is almost fully out and her thorax is almost fully out. And right there next to it is another newly emerged bee. You can kind of see that they are lighter in color, they're fuzzier. They don't even have the ability to fly for the first 24 hours. So they're completely defenseless. Here's one right now. This is one that just came out. And so she wouldn't be able to fly if she fell off the frame. So we're going to be careful to not drop her. And there's a number of these very young bees on the frame. So that indicates that these bees are doing very well. And when they come out, the first thing they do is they start going into their hive roles. And so this is all age-based. When they first come in, they will be nurse bees for a few days, taking care of the brood, taking care of the queen. As they age, they transition into those house roles that we talked about, the food processing, the comb building, and the cleanliness tasks. And then your oldest bees are then going to be doing the most riskiest tasks, which is the foraging, going and leaving the hive, potentially getting exposed to pesticides or being exposed to weather extremes, rain, heat, desiccation, predation. So there's a lot of dangers out in the world. And so foragers are the oldest bees taking on the most risky tasks. So here I'm going to try to find our very last individual, which is our drones. And here I have some drones on this frame. I'm going to come over here and show you on this frame. Oh, and it looks like we have some pollen here. So see how there's this yellow stuff on the side of that frame right there? And they're all different colors or color variants of orange and yellow and kind of pale yellow and kind of even a creamy white. Well, that indicates that there's a number of flower types that the bees are collecting from. So I've seen yellow pollen, blue pollen, red pollen, purple pollen, just really beautiful assortment of pollen colors indicates that the bees have a variety of foods. And that is really good because that means they have ample nutrition. That means that they have a nice array of different foods to give them the nutrition that they need to fight off all sorts of other problems like diseases and pests. So here you can see more of those larvae and more of the brood, and those nurse bees will consume that pollen so that they have enough of brood that they can then produce the food to feed the babies or the brood. And I didn't find any drones on that frame, so I'm going to look into this next frame and see if I can continue to find. Here's another beautiful frame with some emerging bees. Looks like there's some food resources on there too. Here's another side with beautiful brood. And here we go, we have some drones on this frame. So I'm going to bring this up close to the camera to see if I can show you. They've got rounded abdomens and really big eyes that meet at the top of their heads. And that allows them to have a 180 aerial view when they are mating. So drones and queens will mate in air. So you can see that this drone has very, very large eyes. And you'll notice that I'm holding it because it has no stinger. So that it makes it real easy for us to handle them. And you can see those eyes are nice and big so they can see and find a queen, a virgin queen to mate with her. And that is the role of the drones. They essentially are genetic copies of their mothers. So their only role is to mate with a virgin queen and pass on her genetic information. And that is a very important role. But the worker bees are the ones that kind of do everything else to keep the hive functioning. So drones are really only around during the summertime. And when they mate, they die. But if they aren't successful in mating and they're still around in the fall, their sister worker bees will actually pull them out of the hive and throw them out because they really don't do much over the winter. And so drones are only around during the summertime and not year round like your workers and your queens. And so that kind of concludes our little tour of the colony. I just want people to remember that honeybees are incredibly important to us. About 1/3 of our diet is pollinated by insects, and honeybees are responsible for pollinating 80% of that. And so it's really important for us to think about the importance of these bees and the role that they play in our ecosystem. They're not just pollinating a lot of our food crops, but they are able to produce and pollinate many of our native forbs and keep our natural landscapes going as well. So thank you so much for coming here, and thanks from the Beard.